It began as an ordinary morning in Tokyo, or so everyone thought. August 6th, 1945, a date that would tear through history like a silent scream. Japan's high command gathered that day in the Imperial Palace, buried under layers of war reports, supply updates, and desperate discussions. The war was not going well. The empire that had once stretched across the Pacific was collapsing. American bombers ruled the skies. Food was running out, and Tokyo still smoldered from previous firebombing raids. At 8:15 that morning, hundreds of miles to the west, something unthinkable happened, and yet, no one in Tokyo knew it yet. A single American bomber, the Enola Gay, released a weapon unlike anything the world had ever seen. Within seconds, the city of Hiroshima, home to more than 300,000 people, vanished in a blinding flash of light. But in Tokyo, there was only confusion. The Imperial General Headquarters received a faint, broken radio transmission. Then, silence. Communications with Hiroshima went dead. The city simply disappeared from the map. At first, Japanese officers assumed it was another large-scale air raid. They were used to it. Dozens of cities had been burned to the ground by B-29 seconds, but Hiroshima was different. No enemy aircraft had been reported in the area after the alert was lifted. Radar stations detected only a handful of planes. Nothing explained what had just happened. As hours passed, staff officers tried to contact Hiroshima's military command, the 2nd General Army, which oversaw the defense of Western Japan. No one answered. The lines were dead. Repeated attempts failed. Field telephones, telegraphs, even emergency military frequencies, nothing came back. Inside the War Ministry, tension began to rise. General Torashiro Kawabe, Deputy Chief of the Army General Staff, paced the corridors. Messages from Osaka and Fukuoka came in, describing a strange, towering cloud rising far beyond the horizon. The witnesses said it looked like a mushroom of fire. Some thought an ammunition depot had exploded. Others said the sun itself seemed to have fallen on Hiroshima. The truth was beyond imagination. By noon, the Japanese High Command still had no reliable report. Only rumors, only fragments. Hiroshima, one of Japan's largest military centers, was gone, and no one could explain why. Meanwhile, in an underground command room, officers spread maps across the table. Aides compared reconnaissance data, wondering if the Americans had developed a new type of incendiary bomb. Maybe a new kind of napalm, one officer said. Another suggested that chemical weapons might have been used, but even the worst firebombing could not erase an entire city in seconds. Something didn't fit. By afternoon, the army tried sending a reconnaissance plane from nearby Iwakuni. The pilot flew toward the direction of Hiroshima. What he saw made him forget to breathe. From 100 kilometers away, the city was covered in thick, rolling smoke, black, gray, and red, spiraling miles into the air. When he returned, he could barely describe what he saw. "The entire city," he said, "is gone." Those words spread like a cold wind through the corridors of the General Staff Office. Gone? How could an entire city simply cease to exist? When the message reached Tokyo, disbelief turned into unease. High-ranking officers looked at each other, uncertain whether to laugh or tremble. General Korechika Anami, the Minister of War, ordered immediate investigation. He was a man of iron discipline, loyal to the emperor, but even he felt a chill run down his spine. They had already heard American radio reports claiming a new type of bomb had been dropped on Hiroshima. Could this be true? Was it possible the Americans had created something beyond human comprehension? That evening, Emperor Hirohito was informed cautiously. His advisors told him there had been a great explosion in Hiroshima, cause unknown. The emperor, calm but visibly disturbed, asked if the city could still function. No one had an answer. Only silence filled the room. Through the night, Tokyo waited for reports. One by one, Courier planes were sent to survey the destruction. None of them returned with good news. When the first photographs arrived, the generals gathered around them in stunned silence. The images showed a wasteland stretching as far as the eye could see, a gray, lifeless desert where Hiroshima once stood. Buildings were erased, bridges twisted like paper, people had vanished into ash. General Umezu, chief of the Army General Staff, stared at the photos, gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white. He was a career soldier, a man who believed Japan could still fight on. But what he saw defied every law of war he'd ever known. This was not destruction, it was obliteration. And yet, denial lingered. Some officers still believed it was an exaggeration, perhaps a chemical blast or a chain of fuel explosions. The human mind simply refused to accept that one bomb could erase a city. But the Americans were not lying. They had done the impossible. As dawn broke on August 7th, the Tokyo newspapers began printing the official American statement. President Truman had announced it to the world. A single atomic bomb had been dropped on Hiroshima. "The force," he said, "from which the sun draws its power, has been loosed against those who brought war to the Far East." The words hit Japan like thunder. Atomic bomb? The phrase meant nothing to most. Even senior officers barely understood what it implied. A few scientists in Japan had studied nuclear fission before the war, but their research had been limited. Now it was clear. The Americans had mastered it and weaponized it. Inside the high command, panic quietly took hold. If the United States possessed more of these bombs, Japan's cities already crippled could vanish one by one. Tokyo, Kyoto, Osaka, all could share Hiroshima's fate. For the first time, even the most loyal generals began to whisper. Maybe the war could not be won. But the government was trapped between pride and survival. The emperor's advisors hesitated to surrender. The army wanted to fight on. And yet, the truth could no longer be ignored. Hiroshima was gone. Completely, irreversibly gone. And the world and Japan would never be the same again. August 7th, 1945, Tokyo. The morning air was thick, heavy, and tense. The Imperial Palace was surrounded by officers moving like shadows, their faces pale, their voices low. The news from Hiroshima had finally begun to take form, but the reality was still too monstrous to grasp. Telegrams trickled in from nearby cities, confirming the same unbelievable truth: Hiroshima had been wiped off the map. General Anami, the Minister of War, summoned an emergency meeting. Around the long, polished table sat the top, military and government officials, silent, grim, and sleepless. They read the American statement again and again, trying to understand what atomic bomb really meant. None of them could. The meeting started with disbelief. Some officers claimed the Americans were bluffing, trying to break Japan's spirit. Others insisted it must be a chemical or conventional bomb, amplified by propaganda. If it were truly atomic, one officer argued, there would be no survivors at all. But reports from the outskirts said otherwise: burned, injured, half-mad survivors stumbling through ruins that no longer resembled a city. By midday, the army sent scientific advisors to investigate. Among them was Dr. Yoshio Nishina, one of Japan's top physicists and a colleague of Niels Bohr before the war. He was one of the few who actually understood what an atomic weapon could be. He took a small aircraft toward the ruins of Hiroshima and landed nearby. What he found left him speechless. He saw nothing but a circular sea of gray, stretching for miles. Concrete foundations, steel beams, melted glass, and silence. Not a single tree stood upright. Everything that had lived or moved had been consumed by heat beyond imagination. Even shadows were burned into the stone walls, silhouettes of people who had existed for only an instant before being vaporized. When Nishina returned to Tokyo that night, The high command gathered to hear his report. The physicist spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully. "This was not a conventional explosion," he said. "The Americans have created a weapon that uses the energy of the atom itself. Hiroshima has been destroyed by nuclear fission." The room fell into stunned silence. No one moved. General Umezu stared down at the table, his lips pressed tightly together. He asked one question, "Can they make more of these?" Nishina nodded grimly. "If they built one, they can build many." It was then that the meaning of Hiroshima truly hit the high command, not as a tragedy, but as a message. The Americans had unleashed something that could end the empire overnight. Meanwhile, Emperor Hirohito was briefed again in the Imperial Palace. The emperor listened quietly, his hands folded on his lap. When the words "new type of bomb" were spoken, he raised his head slightly and asked, "Then, is Hiroshima completely destroyed?" The aide hesitated. "Yes, Your Majesty," the emperor said, nothing more. Those present later described his face as pale, expressionless, yet his silence spoke louder than any order. But not everyone in power was ready to give up. The military faction, led by die-hard officers, believed Japan should fight on, even if it meant the complete destruction of the nation. They argued that the Americans had only one bomb. Perhaps it was a one-time weapon. They convinced themselves that surrender would dishonor the dead. Still, reality kept breaking through the walls of the bladers. Denial. Reports from the ruins revealed horrors no firebombing had ever caused. Radiation sickness, an unknown phenomenon, began to appear among survivors. Men and women who had seemed unharmed the first day began to collapse days later, their hair falling out, their skin bleeding. Doctors were helpless. No one understood what was killing them. In Tokyo, rumors spread through the ministries. Some whispered that Hiroshima had been erased by the power of the sun. Others claimed it was divine punishment. But deep down, even the proudest generals knew this was science beyond anything Japan could counter. American radio broadcasts continued to echo across the Pacific. President Truman's words were played over and over. "If they do not now accept our terms, they may expect a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth." Those words reached every corner of Japan's leadership. The rain of ruin. Everyone understood what that "do them" meant now. Still, there was hesitation. Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki wanted to explore surrender through diplomatic channels. He quietly approached the Soviets, hoping they would mediate peace. But even as Japan sent messages to Moscow, another storm was gathering. On August 8th, 2 days after Hiroshima's destruction, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan. The Red Army invaded Manchuria within hours. For Japan's high command, it was the final blow. They were surrounded on all sides, and the empire was collapsing from within. That same night, a secret Imperial Council meeting was called. The participants, 6 men, known as the Big Six, met to decide Japan's fate. Half demanded immediate surrender. The others refused. The debate went on deep into the night. Each man knew that another bomb could fall at any moment. And then, it did. On the morning of August 9th, at 11:02 a.m., the city of Nagasaki vanished beneath another atomic blast. This time, there was no confusion. Tokyo knew instantly what it meant. When the first reports came in, General Anami said nothing for a long time. "Finally," he muttered, "then there will be no Japan left." By evening, the High Command gathered once more in the underground war ministry. The mood was darker than ever. The air itself felt heavy with resignation. General Umezu clenched his fists and asked, "How many more of these bombs do they have?" No one answered, but everyone feared the same thing, that Tokyo would be next. Outside, the emperor's aides whispered that he was prepared to speak directly to the nation, something no emperor had ever done before. He wanted peace, even if it meant humiliation. Still, in those dim-lit corridors, some officers refused to accept it. They swore to fight until the last man, to defend the emperor's honor, even if every city burned. But that argument would not last long. The atomic bomb had done more than destroy cities. It had shattered the self, the very belief that war could still bring victory. And as the final debates raged inside the palace walls, Japan's leaders stood on the edge of an impossible decision: surrender or extinction. August 9th, 1945, the day Nagasaki burned. Japan's leadership stood in a nightmare of their own making. The atomic bombs had done what millions of Allied soldiers could not. They had brought the Empire of Japan to its knees. Inside the Imperial Palace, the mood was cold and silent. The air was thick with tobacco smoke, exhaustion, and despair. General Anami, the Minister of War, sat still, his uniform pressed and immaculate, but his face pale with defeat. Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki stared blankly at a map that no longer mattered. Every city on it was scarred, every hope on it erased. That evening, Emperor Hirohito summoned his closest advisors to a private meeting in the Supreme War Council. There were 6 men in that room, known as the Big Six. Their voices had shaped Japan's war from the beginning. Now, they had to decide whether it should end. Half of them, including Foreign Minister Togo, pleaded for surrender. They argued that Japan could not withstand more atomic bombs. Togo said quietly, "The enemy has a weapon capable of annihilating mankind itself. Continuing this war is meaningless." The others, hardened by pride and duty, refused. They believed surrender would destroy the soul of Japan. General Umezu clenched his jaw and said, "Better to die than live under the enemy's boots." The room erupted in bitter argument. The emperor, who usually remained silent in such councils, listened until he could bear no more. When the debate reached deadlock, Hirohito did something no emperor had done in centuries. He spoke. His voice was calm, quiet, yet filled with sorrow. "The war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage," he said. "If we continue, it will only bring destruction upon our people. I cannot bear to see my innocent subjects suffer any longer." Those words ended the debate. The decision had been made. Japan would surrender. But even then, the nightmare was not over. Within the military, a group of officers refused to accept the emperor's will. They plotted a coup, hoping to seize the Imperial Palace, destroy the surrender recordings, and continue the war. As midnight approached on August 14th, their plan went into motion. Soldiers stormed the palace grounds, cutting phone lines, blocking gates, and searching desperately for the emperor's recorded message, the one that would announce surrender to the entire nation. They failed. Loyal guards protected the recording, and by dawn, the coup collapsed. The rebels realized it was over. Some took their own lives in shame. Others simply vanished into the darkness. On August 15th, 1945, at precisely noon, the emperor's voice echoed across the radio waves, the first time his people had ever heard him speak. His words were formal, indirect, but unmistakable. "The enemy has begun to employ a new and most cruel bomb, the power of which to do damage is incalculable. Should we continue to fight, it would result in the total extinction of human civilization." Every home, every soldier, every survivor of Hiroshima understood what he meant. The war was over. When the broadcast ended, silence spread across the nation. In military bases, officers wept. Some bowed toward the radio and whispered prayers. Others, unable to face the shame of defeat, drew their swords for the last time. In Tokyo, General Anami wrote his final note of apology to the emperor. "I, with my death, humbly apologize for the great crime." Then, he took his own life. Outside, the world moved on without him. The surrender ceremony aboard the USS Missouri would soon mark the end of the Second World War. But for those who had commanded Japan's armies, the scars ran deeper than any wound. When historians later examined the documents and diaries from those final days, a haunting pattern appeared. None of Japan's top generals had truly believed such a weapon could exist until it was used. They had gambled on the idea that the Americans would never be able to break their will. Hiroshima and Nagasaki proved them wrong. In one meeting after the war, surviving officers reflected on that day when Hiroshima vanished. One of them, former Army Deputy Chief Torashiro Kawabe, said softly, "When we learned what had happened, we no longer spoke as soldiers. We sat in silence." There were no words left for such a thing. Even years later, the memory of that silence haunted those who had been in the war ministry. Some said it was the first moment they truly felt the war was lost. Not when the Americans took Okinawa, not when Tokyo burned, but when a single flash of light erased a city in an instant. And perhaps that was the cruelest truth of all, that the atomic bomb didn't just destroy Hiroshima. It shattered the illusion that courage, loyalty, or honor could stand against the power of science. Japan's high command had once believed they could outlast any enemy. But as they stared at the ashes of Hiroshima, they realized they were staring at the end of an age, the death of the samurai spirit, the death of empire, and the beginning of something terrifyingly new. In the days that followed, Japan's leaders wrote their final reports, gave their last orders, and vanished quietly into history. The emperor remained a symbol not of conquest, but of survival. And the world looked at the ruins of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and saw not victory, but a warning that humankind had touched something it was never meant to touch. And on that day, when Japan's high command realized Hiroshima was gone, truly gone, the most disciplined army in the world finally understood the meaning of defeat, not through surrender, not through occupation, but through silence and the unbearable weight of what they had witnessed.